Great, great. I was very close. Like, oh, he must be watching the memorial. Hold on, let me catch it real quick before we get started.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, I didn't know if you were working out. So, all right, let me go ahead and actually, you know what I'm gonna do? Actually, I'm gonna do something a little different.
What you want to do today?
All right, huh?
What you want to do?
Well, I'm thinking if I should put this on our YouTube page, we're really trying to get some more views on it
Oh,
for the
okay.
paper. But you want? I'm also gonna put it on Facebook Live. You good with that?
Okay, good.
All right, awesome. All right, let me set this on. As stated, we got a lot of feedback from your article on first testimony from yesterday. So I thought this would be a good time just to talk about that. Talk about the comparison of civil rights then and now, and then something, maybe a message you can share with the younger people as well. So maybe people are watching that. Okay.
Okay, Roger that.
All right, appreciate it. How's everybody feeling today? Everything going good?
Everything's going good. Can you see me? I know I got the light. Do I need to close the window? Can the light reflection?
If you could close the light just to shine just a little bit, it looks like the
Okay.
awakening's on your side.
Okay, hold on.
Okay, I'll give you a chance to set up on this then. Just let me know when you're ready.
Okay, it's on.
All right.
That's better.
Much better. All right. Oh, there we go. And of course, is noted with representing Georgia. Of course, there's no other better way to do that. All right. Okay. All right. All right. Here we go. All right. We're getting ready to go live. All right. Don't worry. I'm not gonna play any Georgia Bulldog music in the background. Say so marching in right there, Dad. So.
Okay.
All right. We're gonna go ahead and fire up. You got it. Appreciate that. All right. We're gonna fire this up. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for joining us on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. My name is John Reid. I'm the editor of the PW Perspective, the only anti-racist publication here in Prince William County. You can find us on our website, www.pwperspective.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, and on our new YouTube channel. And for those who've been reading the news of the last couple of days, you've known that we've had a tragic passing of two civil rights icons. First, the late Congressman John Lewis from 5th District of Georgia. And earlier on that day, we also had the passing of the Reverend C.T. Vivian, two men who were instrumental in the civil rights battles, not just in the 1960s, but for, of course, Reverend Vivian back in the 1940s and prequel to today. And so what we want to do for those who are watching, again, thank you so much for joining us on Facebook Live and YouTube. We have with me, well, someone who's very special in my own personal life, a civil rights advocate himself, a professor, a teacher, a bishop, so many titles that if I describe all the titles, it'd take more time than the interview. Of course, talking about my own father, Bishop John Reid III. Bishop, Dad, so much thanks for having me here. How's it going today down in Georgia?
Well, it's a pleasure. It's a nice hot day down here in Georgia. Beautiful day today. So everything's going very well here in Georgia right now.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. And it's so great to have you here. And for those who are notice, speaking of Georgia, of course, yes, for those watching or representing the Georgia Bulldogs in the back, and of course, Dad representing Georgia Bulldogs on the front. So, if there are any Georgia Tech, South Carolina fans or others, hey, this is Georgia territory. So,
sorry about it.
We're going to get right into it and just talk a little about the events that happened this weekend. And as stated in the edition of Our Voices, the weekend edition of Our Voices, you had talked about your experiences with meeting with, seeing Reverend Vivian in person, as well as getting a chance to meet Congressman Lewis. So if you could just talk about that and your personal experiences with them from a child and when you were older.
Well, I'll give you a little bit of my experience that I had as a teenager. I was actually as a teenager when I first had the opportunity to see Dr. Martin Luther King at a church, and he was always accompanied by an entourage there. And with that entourage were Reverend Vivian and is also Congressman Lewis too. Also had an opportunity to spent some time with Congressman Lewis back in 1995. I was checking my records between 1995 and 96. I was traveling, and I was on a flight from Washington to Atlanta, and he was on that flight, and we were actually sitting right together on the same flight there. And I was surprised. I recognized him right off. And I was surprised that, he was riding in coach, you know, riding in coach right along
Oh
with the
wow.
regular people. Um, Everyone on the plane knew him, all the flight attendants and everyone there knew him. Actually, when the flight attendants came by to serve the food, they didn't even ask him what he wanted. They knew what he wanted. But he was a extremely cordial man, a very humble person. What struck me as I shared some of my civil rights experience with him back in 1965 when we integrated the schools, and back in 64 when we began the preparation for integrating the schools. And also, I shared with him back in 1970 when I was in a protest march and was beaten in a protest march and arrested. So, but what I shared with him, I told him, I said, watching him, seeing him endure the freedom rides and seeing him what he endured at the lunch counters and the things that he endured made it easier for me. If John Lewis could do it, if he could take a lick, I could take a lick. And we laughed about that. And he actually didn't want to talk much about himself. He wanted to more talk more about me. And this was another surprising thing about this individual, the type of person that he was. I think he spoke to literally every person on that plane. And it's a rememberable time. It's a time that I'll never forget in my life.
That's very beautiful, and and the chance you got to talk about what he said, that how he inspired you. If, he could take a look, you could take a look, and actually, if you could, Dad, just share a few moments with those our audience watching. If you could talk a few moments about what you endured during the civil rights movement and some of the things that you took place in your place in Middle Georgia and
You
beyond.
know, the civil rights movement is still on. People don't realize this is something that is ongoing. We have not arrived. This is like a journey that we've never truly arrived. And many people think, well, hey, well, that was for the 50s and that was for the 60s. They think about the Birmingham and all the boycotts and things like that. We were always boycotting. I remember asking, where can we go? Because we were boycotting certain stores. I was raised in Macon, Georgia, and we began to boycott stores that they weren't hiring any blacks in the store. Well, we didn't go to the store. Um, Things were very much different back then. When you think about it, John, I was an early teenager in my teenage years when this occurred. Many of our young adults and many people that are probably listening in your audience probably have no concept of what people endured back then. The terror that they went through just to merely vote. I remember even when the state fair came to town, there was one night where only the colored people could come. Saturday night was colored people's night,
Wow.
and there was you couldn't drink out of a fountain if it wasn't labeled colored or white. You assumed that it was white, and so you didn't drink out of fountains. There were two um, completely different worlds. Although we have a way to go, I mean, we have come a mighty long way based upon the sacrifices of Dr. Vivian, Dr. Martin Luther King, Mr. Congressman Lewis. All these people have endured. We have come a tremendous long way. There are no more dogs on us. We're not being beaten just for protesting and things like that. Some of those things are happening, but it's nowhere near where it was before, where we had people literally just would go missing, you know, in our family and things like that because they said the wrong thing. And so we're living in a better time, but things can get a lot better. They need to get a lot better.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought that up because I think sometimes when we see the incidents, when we see the news of and the stories of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and others, Sandra Bland, and I can go on, and it's not to lessen the impact of what's been taking place in comparison to back then, but for those who are watching, and maybe give a little more perspective of retrospective about what you saw, what you experienced, and how it is in comparison to today. But as stated, one of the things you did, you had a lot of runnings with police officers yourself. And if you could take a few minutes maybe talk about that.
Yes, all of those instances, think about it. If we didn't have a camera, well, think about if we didn't have the modern technology we have today for those things that, obviously they were happening before. old habits are very difficult to break. I remember in the 1960s, my father took me and my uncle to see the Harlem Globetrotters. And we were on the way back, and we pulled up to our house, and the police car had our driveway blocked. He was actually across our driveway, and he writing someone a ticket. And we lived in one of the few suburbs there where colored people could actually live. I'll use that term for them. There were about three neighborhoods where you considered as suburban, where black people had homes and could afford homes. And my parents worked, my dad always worked two jobs literally. My mom worked one or two jobs a lot of the times too. And in order for us to have that nice home. And so the police had, the person that pulled away, police still sat there. And my dad was right behind there, sat patiently. Then all of a sudden, my daddy just tooted the horn for the police to move so he could get in his driveway. The policeman came to the car and said, "Boy, why are you blowing the horn at me?" And so when he said that, my dad looked at me and told me to go to the next door neighbor's house. My next door neighbor was the president of the NAACP. He said, "Don't ask me no questions. Go there to my next door neighbor's house." And I got out of the car and I ran to the house. It was late at night, it's about 11:30,
Oh, were you
and
scared? I mean, that something could have happened when
you
you
know,
once your back was turned.
yeah. But the look that he gave me was, get out the car and go do what I told you to do. And my uncle stayed in the car with him, and they proceeded to the other police got out the other side, and police, to question him. He just told them, "Look, sir, I live in that's my home right there, and you're blocking my driveway. And if you just please move up, I get back into my driveway. That's all I asked." And when we came there, they had called another police car, and by the time I got the next door neighbor there, how he was, he came out and called another member of the NAACP, and there we were, a big crowd of people out there in the front of our house, and they were threatening to arrest my dad just for blowing his horn at the police and asking the police to move over. And eventually they did move because enough of us came out in the neighborhood and they didn't want to see. But, they held us up over 2 hours. Here it is. My dad had to go to sleep, be at work the next morning. And just for nothing, just mere harassment that we had to undergo then. So these are the kind of things that you had to face. We were driving in the wrong neighborhood. I remember in college days, and I went to Savannah State, and I was go sometime weekends with some of my fraternity brothers. We would hang out, and there were certain sides of town. They were actually, um, and this was 1969 and 70. There were still towns that were sundown towns. People don't understand that
What's a sundown town?
terminology. A sundown town was basically that you could be in that town in the daytime, but when it got dark, you weren't allowed to be in that city at all. Whether you're driving it or anything, you would be arrested or you would be pulled over, and they were called sundown towns. And many of these existed over on the southeastern coast of Georgia. And so you make sure that you weren't in those counties because you could just get arrested or anything could happen to you just because you were out that night and in those neighborhoods and in those towns.
Wow, and talk about that because when during your teenage years, and for those no, you were in high school, and you went eventually to Savannah State and then to Mercer University, and you were in the time of the turbulent late '60s and '70s. Can you talk about what was that like? What was that scene like, especially in Miller, Georgia? I mean, we'd already had it was 3 years removed from the Black Sunday incident, the Evans Pettus Bridge in some Alabama, and some of these incidents that happened throughout the nation. But in your particular area in Middle Georgia, what was that atmosphere like?
Well, the atmosphere was, it was somewhat, a little bit of a turmoil there because once Brown versus the Board of Education passed, and then you had the Little Rock Nine, and those things happened. Well, each state, because of states' rights at that time, each state could contend even what the Supreme Court had ruled. And this thing's held up in court for years. So you go from 1954 to 10 years later, and Georgia was being fought back and forth. And it was finally they agreed that they would begin to desegregate the schools. However, it was based upon the selection. It was voluntarily. desegregation. I was one of 10 students that desegregated. Before that year, there was one person that had integrated the school at Willingham High School for boys in
Hmm.
Macon, Georgia. And then the following year, in 1965, we went there, and with 10 of us in the entire high school, over this was a huge high school, over 1,000 students there. And during that time, the white schools and the black schools were different in the way that the white schools were all, they were non-co-ed. So there was an all boys, boys school exclusively. As we had to prepare for that, there were 10 of us that were selected. We had to be the best. We had to have the highest IQ scores. We had to prepare for 3 months because technically we were 2 years academically behind the white kids. Uh,
Mm.
there were volunteers that came down from the north. Most of them were Jewish. They came down and spent time and taught us to tutor us to bring us up to an academic level. But you can't make up 3 years in 3 months. I mean 2 years in three
Right.
months. The same book that we had for the ninth grade was the seventh grade book for the white kids. Let's give you an idea. That was their seventh grade book. So we were that far behind. And so we had to aggressively study. Not only that, we had to prepare ourselves mentally for the abuse. And there were two worlds back then. You didn't have an intertwined black and white world. So you had no interaction with white people. I didn't know a single white person in my life. I had never been exposed to that world. So
Mm.
hearing people call you names, seeing the Confederate flags flying every day, nearly every day, I saw Confederate flags flying in front of the school and people yelling and screaming and calling you the N word and everything. That's why I despise that word today. And I despise that flag because I saw it for years. Every day it was waved in my face. And many people can't grasp trying to go into a hostile environment, not only that, but then get an education, enduring that level of abuse. It was sometimes I sit back and think about it, and I'm 14 years old too. You're 14 years old,
Right.
and you're facing all of that too.
And talk about that if you can. And we're here talking with my father, Bishop John Reid, and about civil rights. Talk about your emotions going, because as a 14-year-old boy, you've already have enough to deal with as it is, and you're discovering yourself. You're going through all these changes, but
Puberty,
now
everything.
you're doing on top of that racism and
Yes.
blatantly in your face. I mean, the first day, what was your emotions going in that first day as you were going into high school?
The first day was very traumatic. Purposely, they had us come in after school, after everyone had gone into classes. So we were instructed to come to the school at 8:45. Well, 8:30, the bell had rang. Everybody was in their classes. We were there. We arrived there, and then we were in the principal's office, and we were given our schedule. And then a person escorted us down the hall to each of our classrooms. And so this was a long, dark hallway. You can hear you every step. And I remember seeing that building. It was beautiful, shining, because all of our buildings were, kind of beat up. I never saw
Right.
floors shine like that. And all the lockers were in place and with locks. Everything was just so pristine. And I remember going to the class and knocking on the door. And by that time, the teacher was calling the roll. And opened the door. The escort opened the door, and I came in, and the class looked at me, and the teacher checked my name and said to have a seat. And I went to the back. There was only one or two seats left in the classroom, and so I had to take the seat way back in the back of the class. And as soon as I sat down in that seat, everybody pulled their seats about 5 yards away from me
Mm.
and kind of left. Nobody wanted to sit next to me. I can still hear those chairs scraping the floor because they did not want to sit next to me at all.
Talk about some of your relations going forward. When was it always that way, or did you begin to have interaction with white students?
Well, no, for the first year, there was very minimal interaction with the white students. I did have one teacher that was very cordial to me, and never forget this. Ironic, the teacher that was cordial to me and really helped me through ended up when I graduated college and went to work for the post office. Guess what? Her husband was my boss. Her
Oh,
husband was
really?
my boss. Show you how small the world is. And
Yeah.
after I had started working for the post office, her husband came to me and he looked at me. He said, "John Reid, did you go to Willingham High School?" I said, "Yes." He said, "My wife was your teacher in the ninth grade, and like, while she was excited about you being working for me." And I was like, "Wow, it's amazing." But most of the places were, most of the people were very distant. We had to look for each other. Can you imagine? We were, you got like 10 students there among about 1,000. Recess in the other areas, you're trying to look for that piece of pepper in the midst of all the salt.
Right.
That's what it
Absolutely.
was. We always ate at the same table. It was back in the back of the lunchroom. Nobody sat at that
Mhm.
table, so there wasn't really any interaction. I think until the second or third year that I was there before I could say that I had some friends I began to talk to, because their concept of who we were is, they didn't know much about us. And I began to feel sorry for many of the white kids because they were literally brainwashed in racism.
Right.
They did not understand that they thought that we were bringing them down. They thought that, we give you everything. Why do you want to come to our school? This is the ideology. Why you want to come? Don't you have your own school? Why you want to come to our school? And this was their ideology. And I never forget, I was very studious and I would love to go to the library. This is the first time I can actually go to a library and actually check books out, because during that time, before libraries and all, they were segregated too. So,
Right.
so here you was, I received a test score in history, and I made a B minus on a test. And John, I had never made a B minus in my life. I didn't know what a B minus looked like.
Really.
I was I was just all A's or B plus. So, B plus was really derogatory to me. And when I made that B minus, I was like devastated. I was like, wow. And immediately, some of the students that were around me, they couldn't believe it. They they thought that someone had to help me. That it was impossible for them, uh, for me to make a better grade than them. That was literally impossible, and they
Wow.
were not accepted. They always felt there were some in the class that the teacher was helping me, somebody was helping me because I could not be smarter than them.
Mm. And you talk about that, like say that transition going through high school and the standard, because you were so as you always are setting a standard of excellence. That whenever and I think that this is kind of comes to microcosm today, that when a black person has a level of success, it has to be because somebody helped them, not because they're able to do it themselves.
Yes.
And we see that not just in academia, but we see that in athletics, we see that in business, we see that in all forms of industry, that someone can't get a black person can't get successful, then that means somebody helped them out, somebody hooked
Right.
them up, and so on and so forth. And so let's transition that a little bit and talk about how in your success in academia and how that translated, but even with everything you were seeing going on, how and the fact that you were around, you got to see Dr. King, you got to see Congressman Lewis, before he went into action, and Reverend Vivian and other civil rights leaders, how you were able to transition that into your own activism, and talk about some of the things that you did and how you participated in the fight for civil rights.
Well, we finally did go through everything in the last 2 years. Were much better than the two previous years, I will say. Uh, some of the people began to soften up. More black students began to come in by the time my senior year. More black students were actually in the school. One issue that I did face, that was uh, racial prejudice. I would expect it. Many times people expect it from lower income people. However, but I remember trying out for the chess club, and
Yes.
the chess club was mostly the very smart kids. I mean, a lot of the guys who were in the chess club ended up being doctors and lawyers and things like that. And I remember going there and wanted to try out for the team. And they looked at me and they told me, these kids, do you know how to play chess? I said, and I looked at them and I told them I've been playing chess since I was 8 years old. And nobody wanted to try out with me. And I tried out. I finally tried. One person sat down with me and I beat the person about 4 or 5 moves. The
Ooh,
next person, I beat the person in about 8 moves.
yes.
And because I was used to playing with a clock. And I did make the team, but nobody that whole year played against me anymore. What helped me in my activism once leaving school and graduating in 1969, I went to Savannah State. I wanted to go to an SBCU. I really do. I wanted to kind of get back in touch with my roots. And
Yes.
one thing that was very disappointing to me was when I went to college there, John, I
Yeah.
was like so advanced. The other kids were so far behind. And it began to anger me because I said, wow, I went to this school and I'm almost like a college level ahead of them. And many kids that went in school were not prepared. And we had back then we had remedial courses, or we used to call them 99 courses. That means
Yeah.
if you had a college course, it was 101, 102. However,
Right.
you took a 99 or a 98, that was pre-college preparatory, and you had to take that in order to come up. And many of the students that came in from some of the schools in the rural Georgia, they end up taking the 99 courses. I was involved with a fraternity. I was pledging a fraternity, and we had to do deeds. And one of the deeds that we had to do was to we had to assist churches and the elderly, but the other thing we had to do was go visit the orphanages. Back then there were orphanages that you didn't have the foster care system like you have now, so
Yes.
many kids ended up, well, this was 1969 and 1970. The orphanages were still segregated. They were still segregated. uh, the white side of the orphanage, beautiful, grass and swing sets and everything, beds, individual beds for the kids. But when we see the black kids, they were sleeping on mats on the floor, army surplus blankets, no pillows. Little girls' hair were matted, boys' hair. Um, Someone would come in once a month to shave their heads, and there were
Yes.
sores all in their head. And we began to protest this, and uh, and a couple of times, and the second time we went to protest downtown with some of the local. Uh, we went someone from the county seat and someone from the House state representative that was there, delegate there, and we were all arrested. And but we, with that arrest and being beaten by the cops, we were peacefully protesting, but we were beaten by the police. I was hit with Billy Club, and many of my other uh, fraternity brothers were beaten severely and
Right.
arrested. We were never booked. We were just kept there all night, and they let us go about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of the night, and they just released us. And I still have a mark on the side of my face now from that Billy Club getting hit there, and I still
Mm.
had some vision issues a few years ago from getting hit with that Billy Club in that eye.
Talk about that. Just the emotion. We have Bishop John Reid, my father, joining us, talking about civil rights. And can you talk about your emotion when? How did that make you feel when after the attack?
Well, after the attack, you go through a lot of anger. You say like, "Wow, I've gone through all this." Think about it, I've gone through 4 years of all this, to get to this point, and you see that these young people, these young kids, they didn't deserve to be treated like that or to be placed in that type of environment wherein you saw the other kids, the other white kids had beautiful things or whatever. I hasten to see even how they ate because everything was totally separate. It was not separate, but equal. That was the thing about Jim Crow and the black
Right.
codes. You're
Mhm.
supposed to have separate. It was not separate. It was separate, but it was far from being equal. And it was devastating. It angered me to the point, we, but these leaders, like you said, Martin Luther King and all, they had instilled so much in us young people
Yes.
to be nonviolent. And so we did not resort. to violence. It was easy to do that. We did have some kids when we got back that did do some violent things, but as for us, we didn't do it. And I think because of the resolve of the examples that we had, it enables us to take it and go through it. And eventually, before the end of that year, they integrated. They integrated those facilities. They just, basically destroyed the old color facility that they had, got rid of it, and everything was done. So it made us feel like, what we did was not in vain. You know.
Absolutely. Talk to me about April 4th, 1968, and if you could follow up with your emotions on June 7th, 1968, with the tragic assassinations of Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy at the time, and just
Yeah.
your feelings, because at this time you're 16
Yeah.
years old. Can you talk about what your emotions were, what you saw around
Oh
you?
yeah. You think I'm in 11th grade, and I remember when Martin Luther King was killed. The next day, many of us didn't go to school. Many of us, we took a day out of school like it was a family member. And, and then later that week, we came to class. I will say this, the kids that were there, the teachers that were there, they were respectful. We couldn't get out of wearing that on our face. You could see the hurt, the disappointment, the anger, the anguish. I can name enough vowels to describe what we were feeling. But people were very careful with their words. The teachers were, and all too. Nobody said anything about Martin. I mean, we used to hear them use the word Martin Luther King and all those things. Nobody said those things
Right.
to us. So all in all, I think there were some bad apples there, but most of the students were respectful for that week, for what we went through, um, and what we were facing, what we were doing. So it was tough. I think that summer when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, this was a very tumultuous time in
Yes.
our country. You almost feel like, wow, is a coup d'etat next, or what is going to occur next? Because you have these assassinations going on. You have the Vietnam War is raging. You had Tet going on in Vietnam. So all of these things are happening. It was like a time we never faced before, and I wouldn't want this generation to have to face that level of political turmoil, and also to see that you're losing your leaders. You're losing the hope you had because everybody just knew that Bobby Kennedy probably would have been the next president, and with how that was occurring with the Vietnam War, the draft. Many of my friends, many people I know went to Vietnam within months after high school and were killed or either maimed. And so those pressures were tremendous. It's very hard to word what we were enduring back in 1968, especially in that summer where you had the riots and things like that. Stuff was happening. So it was a tenseness in the air. It was a level of uncertainty like you never have experienced. And that going along with being a teenager, going back, I tell
Hmm.
you what, going into my senior year that year, um, into the fall of 1968, you like, what good is this doing? You get to the point you just throw your hand up. What good are they gonna kill us all? Before that you had Medgar Evers and other people that killed, and people were getting in the way. And it's somewhat like what people are seeing now with what's going on with the George Floyd and other issues that are happening, but nowhere on that level because these were national figures that were taken away.
Right, and it's interesting bringing up. I think of a comment that Dr. Todd Boyd, professor of urban studies at University of Southern California, once said. They took away the dream, they just gave them a taste of the nightmare.
Yeah.
And we all know that riots are the language of the unheard, and they felt that maybe during that time that was the only way that people could be heard by the destruction of property. And so I want to ask you this transition a little bit forward. The term Black Power. What does that mean to you when you see that? Actually, you see they raised this. What does Black Power mean to you?
Well, you know, after that happened, when I went to college, and then you had the Black Stokely Carmichael in that group, I will say, um, what you see now, it was not the person that was then. I became very radicalized in college. After that first year, after getting that beating from the police and things like that, after that, I almost got like a junior Black Panther. My afro got big. I wore a bandana. I had pink glasses and everything, with the goatee and the beard. And I was very radical, you know, right on, brother, back then. I tell people then, back then, we were soul brothers. The level of unity and respect among Black people was never at a level that I've experienced before.
Mm,
And I don't see that now. I don't see the respect. I don't see the honor for the elders that we used to have. We esteemed our elders. We loved people. Um, you didn't have the crime against each other. You could walk in your neighborhoods and not worry about getting shot and things like that. So it was an entirely different different era then, and just before all the drugs and stuff came in. But I went through that season right up to the time I got married, where I was kind of somewhat radical and kind of hardcore. But then the people that knew me deep down inside, you know, I love the Lord, and eventually, I came to my senses. But I went to that point where my afro was so big I didn't have any peripheral vision. I mean, I was like, I wore dashikis and bandanas and ascots and things like that. That was my attire then. So I was really anti the man. And
mm,
and eventually, when I graduated from college and went to working, uh, and they wanted me to get into they found out I had a college degree, and they asked me to go into management, and that's the last thing I said. I don't want to be the man. And you know, I just don't want to be the man. I
well,
don't
you
want to.
know,
I don't want to sound like that. What you call it? What that movie about the
who's the
guy?
man?
Yeah, no. What was the one? The guy was a soul brother or whatever.
Touch the Shaft, the one, the son of Shaft. You mean the one where his
Not
son worked for the FBI?
no. The with the brother man. The guy with the enemy was the man. What was
Oh,
that
you're talking about, I'm
show?
gonna get you, sucker.
No, not yeah. You know, that was one of them, but the other one was before that, where the guy had the big afro, real big
Oh, you
afro.
talking Undercover Brother?
Undercover brother, yeah,
Yeah, I knew we'd get it eventually. I know
yeah.
Facebook would tell me.
Um, that was us back then.
Yeah. Oh, that's and like you said, but you talk about the unity and the representation that there was a oneness in the community. It wasn't like we see today, but
No,
where it's like Black Lives Matter, the organization, versus the Black Lives Matter movement. Now everyone has the same long-term goals, and you transition that and talk about you dedicate your life into the ministry and sharing the word of God and talking with people about that, but at the same time you still had that teaching of reconciliation one with another in cultural society. So how are you able to blend that? How are you able to talk about that on the pulpit? Because a lot of people say that's not a topic that should be on the pulpit. What do you say to that?
you know, it's a gorilla in the room, you know, and we don't like to speak to the gorilla in the room. I have to look back and see what Jesus did. Jesus faced every adversarial situation, and he went into it head on. When he went to the temple and they were exchanging monies and things like that, what he went and made a belt of cords, and then he beat him and he turned over the tables. When he went to the Samaritan woman, he confronted her. He actually said on the well. So he faced these situations that we have to face. And an enemy, things won't go away until you face them. You really have to face them. And you know, it's bad to find out things about people later. I rather for to know people. I never forget. I had this guy that was I had befriended, and we weren't like close friends, but I had befriended him to the point where we would talk. And he made it clear that his family was, you know, active in the Ku Klux Klan and things like
Mm,
that. But I never forget. But when we graduated, he came and shook my hand, And this is one of the first time I think I ever shook a white person's hand.
Oh,
And
wow.
he looked at me. He said, "Have a good life, John." And he said, and then he leaned over to say, he said, "You know, it's bad to hate somebody for all these years." He said, "Get to know him first." And I
Mm,
said, like, wow, that stayed with me for years. Then how can you hate somebody that you don't even know?
right.
You don't even
Absolutely.
know. I mean, you don't even know a person. And so when my time in church and going into Central America and into Africa in the later years, actually seeing how people treated other people and how Jesus would want us to treat other people, that we have to be, you know, we got to be the same. And there is, you know, racism. What is racism? You know, well, many times people we call racism is really racial insensitivity. Many things that we call racism and things like that, many times people are just insensitive. They just don't, they're not really racist. They have racial insensitivity, where they never have been exposed to other people or really know other people, what other people are all about. So it's very good to get exposed to other cultures. That I've been exposed to cultures, uh, to to Latin American culture, to African culture, uh, to European culture, to white culture. Being exposed to these cultures, and then people get an opportunity to know you. Then they can make their mind up if they really hate you or not.
Absolutely. That was very, very beautiful, important words. And for those who are watching on Facebook Live and YouTube, I'm joined here by my father, Bishop John Reid, as we're talking about his life in civil rights on the passing of the late John Lewis and Reverend C.T. Vivian. So let's transition that today. You talked about, racial insensitivity and how we can talk with one another. So how can we, and then I want if you could address this, especially for your younger viewers, for those who are angry at the system and those who are chanting, Black Lives Matter, and then immediately is countered by all lives matter or blue lives matter, back to blue. How can we begin to have those kind of conversations to remove the barriers of racial insensitivity?
Well, what we have to do, I was always told is you got to clean your own house first. You have to work on your own house first before I can tell you how to clean your house. My grass has to be cut before I can tell you about your yard. I think that we have to do a lot within our culture. I think there's a lot of work to do. I think that we have to clean up. What I mean by cleaning up, that means we got to get our families in order. We have to get our house in order. We need to go into our neighborhoods. Why is there so much crime in our neighborhoods? I mean, it's now we don't even, think about it. We don't even want to live in our own neighborhoods now with black people. And we got to find out why. We got to address the fatherless, the family situation, what's happening in our culture, um, the destruction of the African American family, that we're only about less than a third of us actually have what we refer to as a nuclear family. And I'm not knocking against single parents, whether it's a single father, a single mother,
Right.
okay? However, it's very important that we have a family around where there is accountability. I know some great men that were raised by single mothers and all, but we need to have accountability. You need to have that uncle. My dad worked a lot, two jobs. He was in the Marines. I had uncles that I knew they would get in my behind. Okay, I had uncles that would tell me, "I make you, boy, you don't get it right. I will make you disappear." And I believe
Mm.
that. I
Oh,
believe
wow.
that. I believe that they had guns and stuff, and they would do
And
it.
they knew how to use them,
Okay,
right?
and they knew how to use them, and they loved me, but boy, they didn't. They didn't tolerate. They did not tolerate. I think we need to go back to the home. We need to address the. If we say Black Lives Matter, all of them should matter. Okay, we're having all these shootings and things like that. We need to do, it's bad what police are doing. Sure, that it's awful. That is absolutely terrible. But what we do to each other is awful and is absolutely terrible too. This week, I mean, my former secretary in Washington, D.C., her grandchild was killed during a protest. Someone shot in the crowd and killed her 11-year-old grandson, 11 years old. I've been consoling her on Facebook. But this was my former secretary. Her grandson died. Okay, an 8-year-old girl here died with a young man walking around with an AK-47, just shooting up the street near the Wendy's where the shooting occurred with Marbury. So these are the things that we need to do. We need to, in order to really have a strong voice. I mean, when we begin to clean up our own act, when we begin to really get ourselves together and everything and begin to turn things around, I think that people will take us seriously. And that's what I will say to the young people. Nothing should get you too angry where you lose respect for yourself, you lose respect for life to the point where we take each other's lives. This is very this is something that's very important. And when we look at what CT Vivian and Lewis, Congressman Lewis, all these people have done, we don't want to make their lives and their deaths in vain for what they have given for the culture. When we went to those schools to integrate, we knew that all of the race rocked on our shoulders because this is what people are going to think of Black people. That's what we thought back then, John. Back in the 60s, you thought then you had pride for your race, you had pride for your name. My grandfather told me this, and I'll never forget. He looked at my face. He said, "Don't you ever embarrass my name. You have my name. Do not bring embarrassment to my name." And he loved me to death. But what he looked at me, boy, his eyes turned red like he was going to kill me. He said, "You have my name, and your name means a lot when we carry a name. The same way
Yes.
you carry a reed, we should be a blessing. We should be. We have to make that difference in the rest of the world. And this is what I sometimes I have not just hatred, but I'll call it righteous indignation when I hear of the news that, even that I lost a son to another young Black man. Okay, these things we need to turn around. We have got to do that. It starts at home, then it spreads abroad. And we have to start at home. And I think with what's going on with the virus now and things like that, with the church, with ministry, I think now we have to de-Americanize Christianity and ministry.
Yes.
I think with my time in Central America and in other countries and in Africa, we have to understand that Christianity here is very westernized. We see Christianity as a building, as a church we go to, but it's actually in these, it's in who we are, that we need to make a difference. And if it takes going into those neighborhoods, if it takes mentoring these young men, if it takes turning these situations around, I spent many of my early ministry years, John, going into prisons, going into delinquent homes and talking to young men, trying to turn their life around before they ended up in jail. And I think this is what we need to do. When I watch any of those television shows now, 48 hours or first 48, and I see someone kill that person, whether it's Black or white, I look at the person that's died, the person going to jail, and all everybody's impacted by crime. And these are things where we need to start.
Absolutely. And if with everything you said, just is right on a point with what we need to do as society. And as you stated, in order for us to bring together, we have to make sure things are in order first. And so,
Yes,
uh, and just wanted to conclude as we get ready to conclude this and just talk about, as you said, we begin racial reconciliation by understanding one another and making sure our environments, our homes are taken care of. What do you say as far as on a political level, though? With some of the debates that we say that the fact that this political system, for those say, was not designed for Black people in mind. What do Black people do in response to that on a government?
well, when we look at things from a political standpoint, there's a lot of political polarization that's happening in our country. It's not just a black and white thing; it's a blue and red thing, or whatever. And people have been very polarized now. Um, the days of where people reached across the table, where there was a compromise somewhat there, that's very sad. It hurts me. It hurts me yesterday. I listened to the governor in Florida, DeSantis, was speaking, and had asked him, he didn't even recognize, didn't want to make any statement concerning Congressman Lewis.
Mm.
Okay, and this is a person that claims to be not only the governor there, but he's a Republican, but he claims to be a born again Christian. and did not make this. So we have to start with this uh, political partisanship is really, it can be the detriment of our people as a whole. So we need to find some common ground. Common ground has to occur. When I came up, ironically, people don't realize this, that when I came up in school, I mean, most of the black people were Republicans. Yeah, I think about 90%, including Martin Luther King, everybody, because the Democratic Party was a party of the segregationists. Okay, they were also known as the Dixiecrats. Okay, and it was a party of business and stuff that helped to get funds and things like that to people. And so we, from that political standpoint, we have to stop looking at parties. I think a political solution is not the answer. I tell people that laws and legislatures, these are not the answers. Things start with us. I'm not to the point where I depend so much on government. Um, we can, we, it's very treacherous ground when you're walking on everything is based on what the government does. Waiting on a government regulation. You're waiting on some type of law to be issued. It's imperative that we, as citizens, begin to start locally. I tell people at your local, start things at your local level. Start things if you're a commonwealth, it's board of supervisors. If it's a regular city, it's the council. All those things. Start at that local level and work things up and begin to bring about changing your neighborhood, changing your community, and that way it moves on up toward changes in the nation.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great way to conclude on there. And so, real quick, as we finish this up, can you talk about let people know what you're doing today?
Well, today I'm working on time. I'm actually working on two books, and I was all carried away writing on this one book that I looked at the clock and I said, "Oh my God, it's 3:01. I'm supposed to be on this conference call." But I'm working on two books right now, and I'm hoping to finish both of them this year. The first book I'm writing is called Coping, dealing with what God has dealt you. And I believe that everyone has been dealt some cards. I treat life like a card game in the book. For each chapter, it deals with the suddenlies, what happens. There's different things that happen to us in life, and they are a part of life. Sudden death, tragedy, loss of jobs, different things like that. But how do we cope with that situation? So that book is entitled Coping. The second book that I'm writing is I Know Why Rams Cry, and it deals with the back in started in 19 in my life. It's somewhat of a self-autobiography of 1964 through 1969, and I talk about my plight and during the times of integration and desegregation in Georgia, and some of the things that we endured, and there's good things and some bad things that we went through, and I share a lot of those experiences candidly. And that book is entitled "I Know Why Rams Cry," and I use that term Rams because that was the mascot of our school. We were the Willingham Rams, and but I was a crying Ram for many years. I went home and at night, think about the next day, I cried because I didn't want to endure that.
Absolutely, but through it all, you've endured and impacted so many lives throughout the world. And I just got to say that on a personal level, this has been a monumental day in my life, and I want to thank you, Ed, for just taking time to talk with me. I know there's so much more we got to discuss,
Yes.
but I know this want to get you back the time for your day. And for everyone who watched on Facebook and YouTube, I want to thank you all so much. Ed, I want to thank you once again for just taking even just an hour to share such wisdom, which I know will impact and impart onto a lot of people. And so, for those who are watching, thank you so much, and we'll be having this out on all channels in the next few days. This is John Reid, sign off from the PW Perspective, reminding you that we will log onto our website, www.pwperspective.com, where we teach the stories of the science minorities. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful day.
God bless you. Thank you.
All right.